and welcome to a new episode of the Computomics Podcast. Today is a special episode. We are starting our new explainer interview series, Make Sense of Science. Our first topic, today's topic, is deep learning for genomic prediction in plant breeding. And with me is Alaukik Saxena from the Computomics team. Alaukik, welcome.
Thank you, Anna.
First off, please tell us, what do you do at Computomics? What's your work there?
I'm a machine learning scientist at Computomics. I'm currently developing advanced machine learning models for genomic prediction, modeling G by E effects, and in practice, we integrate, for example, genomic markers, pedigree relationships, and high-dimensional environmental covariates to predict plant phenotypes in and across many environments. So I think that was a mouthful.
I like the way you put that. But that's what we're here to explain, basically. So with what you just said that you do, what is the challenge in trying to do that, to predict the phenotype from the genotype plus environment information?
First of all, I want to explain what is a phenotype here, are traits of plants. For example, plant height, it can be flowering time, or it can be yield that we get, for example, for a crop like maize. And the challenge here is that we want to take a DNA marker fingerprint of a plant and also the environment they are being grown in. We want to use this information to predict, for example, if we cross different plants and what phenotypes or traits those plants will have. So without even spending time in growing these new plants or spending money in these breeding programs, we can have predictions for our new plants. And this is really useful in breeding.
How easy or how hard is it to do that?
First challenge is that you have to get SNP marker data or DNA marker data for people who do not understand exactly what is SNP. Then there are breeding programs where the breeders experiment or grow different plants in different locations so that they can judge how a plant grows in different environments. And they extract these DNA markers from them. So one challenge is this creation of this data itself. And then there is a second bit that we have to take this data, we have to clean it, and then we have to train models onto these data, be it machine learning models, statistical models, so that we can understand how the genotypes or the environmental covariates are really related to these traits or phenotypes of the plants. And then in the end, make a prediction. And then understanding how good our prediction was, whether it is reliable enough that we can in future design more experiments based on our predictions.
So maybe if we can just put it in one sentence, what is genomic prediction?
Genomic prediction in one sentence would be that you take DNA markers from plants and then try to predict or train a model on these markers for a particular trait so that you can make predictions for these traits.
This genomic prediction is often described as a, quote, high-dimensional problem, unquote. What does that actually mean in practical terms, and why is that the challenging part, maybe, or one of the challenges?
It basically means that we have far more variables than observations. I can give you an example. In one of our maize breeding programs, we have around 10,000 SNP markers, but we only have a few hundred or a couple of thousand phenotyped plants to train on. We have far more features than the examples itself, and that is challenging because models can easily overfit. That is, they may appear to find patterns that exactly do not exist or they fit on the noise. This can also be, in one sentence, it is they really perform good on training data, but they do not generalize on new plants or new environments.
Beyond the genome itself, how does environmental variability complicate prediction tasks like the ones you just gave us as an example?
I want to again start with an example.
That's always best.
One maize variety can yield around 12 tons per hectare in one location, and in another location, it might yield just 7 tons per hectare. So same genetics, but different environments can cause this variability. Environment here means everything: temperature, rainfall timing, soil, humidity, even the management practices. So the real challenge is that these factors interact with the genetics itself. We call this genotype by environment effect. One of the ideas like modeling this G by E effect requires capturing not just the average conditions, but specific patterns and their timing. So just the average temperature won't do. You have to capture how temperature was varying during the growth periods of a plant. for example.
So, what would you say, to what extent can current statistical models such as GBLUP realistically capture genotype by environment interactions?
GBLUP basically stands for Genomic Best Linear Unbiased Prediction, and it is a common statistical model used in breeding. So GBLUP is the workhorse of genomic prediction for a good reason. So it is elegant, computationally efficient, and surprisingly give you really good results, especially when you have limited training data. It can be extended to capture G by E effect, and there are many papers, and in practice also people have shown that to a certain extent it can extract G by E effect, but it operates in a linear framework. So that is a limitation. It assumes that gene effects are additive and model environments as discrete categories instead of giving them full environmental covariates. So in reality, things can be much more messier. Interactions between genes and environment is not generally linear and can involve complex combinations. And that is where machine learning and deep learning comes into picture. This gap can be filled by them.
Can I just stop you real quick? Because I think one of the differences, so obviously we have the difference between the statistical model and then machine learning and deep learning models, but also what is even the difference between machine learning and deep learning? I think that's something we should clarify as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Machine learning is simply that they are mathematical models that can learn from data without being explicitly programmed to. And simple classical machine learning models can be random forest and support vector machines. Deep learning is just a subset of machine learning. In deep learning, generally we use neural networks in layers, and these models can extract very complicated patterns in your data. And especially when your data has images or has sequences. Like if you have used ChatGPT, it is using transformer architecture behind it. And that is basically deep learning, or it has neural nets as its basic unit that is working behind. Yeah, so that is the difference between them. So all deep learning is machine learning, but all machine learning is not deep learning. And now you have to remind me where we were.
We were talking about, you were nicely explaining how kind of current statistical models, maybe more traditional models like GBLUP, already have great results, but they tend to maybe not be as strong when they deal with the messy parts of life or ag tech. So yeah, I guess the natural question is then, what more can, or what different qualities can machine learning or deep learning models deliver for, again, going back to the original problem that we're trying to solve, predicting in plant breeding. So would you say that GBLUP and machine and deep learning just have different strengths, but are still both very relevant? Or how would you put that?
Absolutely. GBLUP and machine learning, deep learning have different strengths. GBLUP is very competitive baseline, especially when you have limited data. Also, it has inbuilt assumptions that helps to regularize the model. So that means you penalize the model whenever it tries to become complex, or if it is too complex, or basically even if you have lesser data, you can still train a model that is not overfitted. As the data grows richer, like we have certain breeding programs where we have a lot of data, this, as I told you, that there is a linear ceiling or linear framework that GBLUP works into, that becomes a real limitation. And that is where machine learning and deep learning comes into picture to fill that gap when things become more complicated and messier, and they can naturally take that complexity into account.
That's true. And I'm sure you've experienced that. I definitely have. And I'm not as deep in machine and deep learning as you are. Sometimes when people hear AI or machine learning, they literally expect magic. Maybe just as a fun kind of question, what's the most unrealistic expectation you've ever come across?
People generally, the most unrealistic expectation is that a model will compensate for a weak data. People sometimes hope that if you use a sophisticated or very complex model, it can automatically solve everything. But in practice, model performance is usually limited by data quality, phenotyping quality, and also experimental design. And the most important thing, whether the evaluation step reflects the real world deployment. So if these things are not taken into account, no matter how complex, how beautiful your model is, it won't understand the data, it won't perform on the data as it should be. So it is a really good practice or advice to breeders to work on their phenotyping instead of just waiting for a very sophisticated model to come into market and solve everything.
So basically, you're saying, yes, it is magic, but only if you feed it the right kind of data and enough. Do you have a tip maybe for breeders on how they can improve their phenotyping?
I think breeders can invest in more sensors or imagery kind of tools like drone images that can help them to get the data in a more reproducible way, but also in a robust way instead of relying on human understanding. For example, if you are trying to see if a crop is disease resistant or not, maybe in general, a breeder will go from plot to plot and see if there are certain marks on the leaves or something like that to understand if a crop is disease resistant or not. But this can also be done by images, drone images or cameras or other kind of sensors, I guess, for different kind of phenotyping. So basically making it more automatic instead of relying on human understanding of what is good and what is bad.
Speaking of, as you just said, we just went in on that point that we really need good data for the model to perform well. I was wondering about model performance. How do you even assess that? There's a lot of, oftentimes people may have come across the term cross-validation, but could you explain quickly how is a model performance assessed and what are common mistakes that can also lead to overly optimistic results maybe?
This is absolutely one of the most important point in genomic predictions. So one of the mistakes that many people do, including me sometimes, is data leakage. And the way it happens, like I'm explaining for somebody who does not know how this procedure is done. So generally when you have a lot of data, you separate it out into training set, validation set, and a test set. And then the idea is that you train your model on the training set that you got, and during the training, you validate the performance on the validation set. And once you have done everything in that was humanly possible, tuning the parameters of the model, everything, then finally you expose your data or get evaluation on the testing set. And that is generally your final understanding how the model will perform in the real world. The biggest mistake people do is, as I said, that they ignore data leakage. That sometimes similar data or what you're trying to actually learn leaks from training data into validation or into even test data. So again, giving an example, imagine you have this problem that you want to predict how a particular crop will perform next year. Okay. So right now it's 2026. In 2027, how it will perform. Now, the best way of validating this or evaluating this data is that you take or partition your data in such a way that year 2022, 23, 24 comes in the training, maybe 24, 25 in validation, and 2026 in the testing. And they should not peek into each other because that is exactly what you are trying to evaluate. Now, if you by chance randomly distribute your data among these three partitions, and that is training, validation, test, then your model will seem to be very optimistic, but it has not generalized across environments or across years, that performance. And this can happen in other ways as well. Now, imagine you are trying to make new hybrids, and by chance, ideally what you should do is that your training, validation, test have families of hybrids separated out. But sometimes people mix these families, and now the model is not able to generalize or learn from the marker data, but it learns the associations that one of the plants is half sibling of some other plant, and that's why it can learn, for example, its trait or performance. But we want that we can take a mother and father, we cross them together and create a new hybrid. And that requires that we separate out the families in different partitions that I told you. And I also make this mistake because sometimes if you do not have the understanding what you're trying to do or what problem you're trying to solve, one can easily miss this very important point of cross-validation.
Thank you. I love the examples you use too, because that really helps us understand. I just have one final question, and it's a very important one. When will you be replaced by a chatbot?
I hope not very soon. I mean, I could assume that you, me, everybody around are using large language models daily. They are good in summarization to extract information and really good in coding. And of course, they make me productive, but they can't design experiments. They can't sit with a breeder and understand what is their problems, what are the challenges they're facing, what assumptions they took when they were designing a program. So this is, at least right now, can be understood by a human being only. So in short, the shift is augmentation, that these things help you around, but right now not replacement. And probably I would be replaced the same time when the breeders are replaced by robots walking in the fields to take the samples. So maybe that is when I will be replaced.
Well, let's see where we go and where we end up. Hey, listeners out there, if you have any topic around agtech, machine learning, something you've been wondering about, feel free to let us know. Alaukik, I'm sure you'll be willing and able to explain some more on the topic.
Yeah, perfect. I would love to do that.
Perfect. In that case, Alaukik, thank you for today and maybe hear you around soon.
Thank you, Anna, for having me.
Thank you for listening in today. Want to learn more? Then check out our show notes and more info on Computomics.com. If you have questions or want to propose a next guest, please reach out to us at podcast@Computomics.com.